Okay, well, we got a lot to cover today, and hopefully it'll be a lot more interactive today than it was last week. Usually the introductions are just sort of me talking, and then it's maybe a little different today. So let's open with prayer, and we will get right to work. Heavenly Father, thank you again for bringing us here to this room, to this place in your time, to learn about you and how we can learn from your ministry and your life, and Lord, just look where you would take us in the ministry that you would have for us. Lord, thank you for preparing works for us to do well before we were even breathing on this world. So keep us well plugged into your ministry and connected to you and through the Spirit. Amen. Okay, so I don't know if any of you guys got the invitation to the city, but I did post up a group on it. So I got that accomplished, but I didn't post the notes up there. So, sorry, I'm betting 500. If this were baseball, boy, I'd be multi-millionaire. But I posted a question. What kind of boy do you think Jesus was? So that's the first question. Second question is, for us to understand that, is it okay for us to read things that we know about Jesus into the silence that we don't know about Jesus? So those are two questions. Normally it's a bad idea to read into something that Scripture doesn't say. But here there's this big enigma of, oh man, who was this boy? So, what do you think? Who was Jesus? What's your expectation of him growing up?
He was adventurous.
Okay.
And I would preface that by saying, like, not many boys that just walk away from their parents. Like, what was he excited about? He was excited about teaching. He was excited about God's house, being in the Word. So, like that was probably pretty adventurous to go, leave everybody, stay there.
Yeah. I don't cover this much in today's, but did you realize how long he was wandering around Jerusalem teaching there? Well,
a couple days.
So it was a 3-day journey out before they went. Do you got Jesus? I don't have Jesus. Do you have Jesus? I don't have Jesus. Where's Jesus? So then looking around, now you got to go a 3-day journey back, and then it was probably a couple days. I think it said that they were looking for him in Jerusalem. If you were mom or dad, would you not be a little bit concerned about what might have happened to him?
I don't think it would take me 3 days to know.
No worries. There's a reason for that, but why he went so long without being noticed. One of them was, you remember how old he was? Well, 12 years old.
So it was a summer camp?
Sort of. That's about the time that you would have a bar mitzvah. So he's moving from young boy to manhood in Jewish society. And so at that time, where he may have come back or ridden with his mom and the ladies on the way back home, well, now he's a man. He should be with Joseph and the other guys. And there seems to be a bit of a miscommunication on who's got it. So, okay, so what else? What else is Jesus like?
I think he would have been very observant and probably curious.
Okay. Curious about
Just what's going on around him, what people were thinking,
okay.
just about everything.
Okay. About life, about creation, about all that stuff.
Everything, yeah.
Do you think that would fit with what the Bible says, that he grew in wisdom and stature and favor? Okay. So he's still going through a learning process and all that kind of thing. Okay. Anyone else want to jot down with her?
More compassionate than most young, teenage boys.
Okay.
I think that kids at that age are a lot less selfless and more focused on themselves and what they're going through and how they're experiencing life. But I think Jesus would have been more compassionate and more selfless in thinking about how others are experiencing life.
Okay.
More.
I want to encourage, just remember that statement right there. Okay, so when we get to the end of it, there's some things there that I think you sort of zeroed in on that I think are going to, that would, as we read back into think there's some things there that most of us wouldn't really consider unless we think about Jesus' compassion, Jesus' love for people, a holy God living in a sinful world. So I think there's going to be some interesting things that we might be able to glean from his life. Okay. All right. So here we go. Today we are going to deal with the genealogies, the birth narrative, and the boyhood. Right. I'm not going to go too deep into the whole Christmas story and all that kind of thing. I think most of us have been Christians long enough to know, or we've heard the stories. I want to start giving some background or some color into that life. Okay, and I think that's going to be important to see how Jesus' early life probably influenced his ministry in his later life. All right. So today, our verse of the day here is Isaiah 53:2. This comes from the suffering servant. It's for he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. How does that strike you when you think about Jesus? Do you think about
I think what was it? One of the kings was tall and Saul, right?
Saul?
Saul, right?
height? Yeah, Saul's tall, head and shoulders above everybody.
You know, and I don't know if David was pretty
Handsome.
Really nice looking.
Yeah.
handsome, you know, that Jesus was just average.
Yeah, you kind of would expect maybe a balding guy. I don't
He
know,
wasn't this
right?
long-haired Norwegian.
Right.
He wasn't?
So some of the photos we actually,
Some of the photos of
yeah,
the
some of the paintings you actually get through from this vision of Jesus. It's definitely Jewish, all that kind of thing. But I think a lot of those photos, those paintings, if you look in like the Shroud of Turin, the shroud that was supposed to cover Jesus' body at the time, that's basically a negative of who the image below. And I think a lot of artists probably got some inspiration from that painting, or from the shroud. And then any other Jewish man that you would have seen. Remember that Jesus was a Jew, and so that's what we're going to kind of hammer on today. All right. Okay. Boy, I'm going to give you another little thing you might want to study. It's a little more than our focus today, but if you look back on this verse and what rabbis would say about the suffering servant, they say that we Christians have it all wrong. That if you look back through Isaiah from about chapter 40 on toward the end, that servant always refers back to Israel, and that this is a metaphor for the servitude of Israel, that suffering that the nation has gone through over the years. And so you might want to consider that how you would respond to that kind of an understanding. I think this clearly talks about Jesus. But if you have some Jewish friends, they would say, no, that's just Israel. Okay, and that would be something that they actually expected way back before Jesus as well. Okay.
Well, just the context of that verse, it says, for he grew, typically Israel's referred to as sheep.
Yep.
So.
In Isaiah, in those passages in Isaiah, it's Jacob, my servant. There's a lot of servant language that does seem to fall onto Israel's shoulders. But like I say, it would be an interesting study if you guys are interested in exploring more of Jesus' Jewishness or Hebrewness. All right, Bill Yancey, if you have the book, you might have noticed this. I really appreciated this statement. And it says, when I go to the Gospels, the accusing voices of the Old Testament are stilled. God, if I may use such language, found out what life is like in the confines of planet Earth. Jesus got acquainted with grief in person, in a brief, troubled life not far from the dusty plains where Job had travailed. Of the many reasons for incarnation, surely one was to answer Job's accusation, do you have eyes of flesh? And for a time, God did. Have you ever stopped to consider that had Jesus not come down here, almost the entirety of Hebrews and our faithful high priest who can go out before us and intercede on our behalf, could he really know what it is that we deal with here? I mean, we talk about his omniscience and everything, but there's something different about experiencing it and knowing it, right? And feeling it and understanding what it means to hit your thumb with a hammer and really feel a lot of pain and language start to come out, right? If he was a carpenter or a mason, then I'm sure he probably whacked his hammer a few times, or whacked his thumb a few times. Okay, genealogies. What is the purpose of a genealogy?
History,
History. History of whom?
family.
Family.
Trace the origins.
Okay? Back in antiquity, how important was it? Especially in the, remember, think Jew. Think you are a Hebrew. Why is it important then?
For a priest or a king, it was important.
Mm-hmm. Sure was.
It establishes status.
Yes. Yep. Do you remember how the land of Palestine, or the Promised Land, was given out? By tribe, by families, by clans. Jews were very, very diligent at keeping track of who was responsible, where your line was, and where you come from, and who you belong to. Levites didn't get property; they were ministers of God. Okay, so you had to be able to prove who you were. So there's a couple of things. One of them is that Matthew begins with David and Abraham and works forward, and then Luke traces from Joseph backwards toward Adam. Why do you suppose that is?
It's the audience that they're writing to.
Okay, so we've got an audience. We've got an audience consideration. Do you know who Matthew was writing to and who Luke was writing to?
Wasn't Matthew doing through Joseph's lineage or something?
Yeah, Matthew goes, go right here. So, let's see, Matthew goes Joseph, here, I'll come up here. Matthew goes Joseph, and Luke goes through Mary, which is actually kind of interesting, right? Because typically you're in a patristic, everything goes through dad, and here Luke shows us the other side of the coin. Okay, so I got a little bit of it. But Matthew, so the purpose here is that Matthew is going to remind Israel of the covenant promises to David and Abraham, and Jesus is going to be the fulfillment of it. It's his establishment. Matthew is establishing the fact that Jesus is the one that is going to fulfill that covenant. There are a couple of when you're talking about the covenant that God made to Israel. There's four places that you really need to commit right up to memory. When you know it, now that I'm in front of you, I forget which ones those are. So 1 second. That's going to be the Abrahamic covenant. Would be Genesis 12, 15, and 17. So in Genesis 12, the Lord makes the great promise that Israel's going to become a nation, or that Abraham will become a nation. In Genesis 15, Abraham's promised a son. And then in Genesis 17, that's the spot where God shows up and says, "Hey, this time next year, you'll have a baby," and Sarah laughs at God, which is really kind of gutsy, right? And he says, "Why'd you laugh?" "Oh, I wasn't laughing." I mean, that is a great story too. But then he also gives the sign of circumcision. So now you start to separate Israel from the rest of the Gentile nations. Your next one is going to be the Davidic covenant, and that's 2 Samuel chapter 7, right, where the promise of David that his offspring will continue the rule over Israel. So there's some really, really important passages in there, critical to your understanding of Israel and even how we as Gentile believers fit back into those promises. All right, Luke traces that line through the human race, and then it shows that he's also a son of God, right? Because Luke ends in that nice phrase in chapter 3 that in verse 37, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, the son of Cainan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So that's the stake in the ground, right? That Jesus is divine, according to Luke, and Jesus is man, according to Matthew. Both of them are going to relate together. Now, this is always fun. Since genealogies are so important in the life of Christ here, do you know anything about your own genealogies? Any funny stories? Any good things?
In high school, it's like several greats uncle, and he was in England at the time when Queen Elizabeth was in her castle. She was in the tower, and he crawled up the outside of the tower to get a view of her, and he did. And of course, she was beheaded the next day. It's pretty much interesting, tenacious guy.
Yeah.
Didn't live through it.
Anybody want to beat that one? Because that's a good one.
I'm a fifth generation to Daniel Boone.
To who?
Daniel Boone.
No joke.
No joke.
So you and Danny go back to Daniel Boone, really?
I know, right?
I've heard this story before.
I believe one over the other. I'm with you.
And then I'm fourth generation on my dad's side from Poland. So, you know.
Interesting. So my dad told me, geez, I must have been a freshman in high school. He says, you know, when you were named, he had just read this book on Irish history, and I'm third generation Irish, and fourth generation Irish, and he says, we named you after this king in Ireland that was seeking to try and unify the country and break away from and pull everybody together, right? Become one great country in freedom and all that kind of. And I'm like, wow, that is cool, right? This is really cool. It's cool to be named after someone that great. And before I made my trip to Ireland, last July, I'm reading up on some of the history, and I found out that this king, Brian Gleeson, while he wanted to unify the nation, couldn't quite get all the clansmen together to do it, and he went over to England to ask for the king's help, and the king went, wow, you've got a lot of nice resources over there, and they have been subject to the king, or to Great Britain ever since. So my dad must have he must have skipped that chapter, and so I don't know. There's some interesting things about about genealogies, and I'm gonna poke through them in just a second. But we want to kind of keep that in mind when we're looking through this birth narrative. There's some interesting things that kind of happen, and I think it's really telling that the God who made us with all the emotions that He did, He took the time to give us two viewpoints in this birth narrative, right? Matthew, you get the story about Joseph, right? And this is where you know that he also was told by an angel, don't leave Mary. What's happening to her is from God. We know that he was an honest and upright man, interested in justice, and which is all the more telling when he says he wanted to put her away quietly. Back then, when you were betrothed, you were basically married. You just didn't have all the all the marital rights that you would until after a marriage. So for him to put her away, he would have had to have divorced her, and that would have been horrible, especially up in Nazareth. So for him to say, and actually, if you you even go back a little bit further back into the law, and this is why it's kind of a crime that we tend to skip through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, because when you read through Leviticus, Mary should have been stoned on her dad's front steps. She was betrothed, she's pregnant, and wow, that's a mark. And so you can imagine now, put yourself in Joseph's position where here's this gal that he's now about to get married to. She's pregnant. He knows I haven't had anything to do with this, and she should be stoned. And how is he going to say, I had nothing to do with this, when they're betrothed and now she's pregnant? So it's quite possible he could lose his life as well. So he wants to do things kind of quietly and you know, I think kind of save both their skin. You also get this picture of a husband who is now protecting his family, and I think this is amazing too, right? Godly men stand up for their families. We protect them. We take the arrows. We comfort our families, and we guide. When you move over into Mary's position, you get her great song, right? The Magnificat. My soul rejoices. My soul magnifies the Lord. Two different descriptions or positions on who visited him. You had the shepherds, you had the wise men, the magi, and then you have her discussion about Jesus. Why did you do this to your father and I? So you have this heavy motherly concern over her son who is now lost. And this is why we say that that 6 day journey, or that 3 days out and the 3 days back and a couple days looking around for Jesus must have been just horrible. I can imagine losing my kid. And also, I think as I was studying this, my mind kind of drifted back to Abraham's sacrifice. Remember how long Abraham Abraham and Isaac, how long they walked, right? Sarah, stay here. We're going. There is no doubt in my mind that Sarah doesn't know what God has told Abraham to do. And now she's at home thinking, what's going to happen here? And it's a 3 day journey back, or 3 days there, and she's thinking my son is going to die. God's requiring of his life, and now it's a 3 day journey back. And so for 6 days she's going, what has God done? So, there's a very interesting play on words that's basically happening in near the same region, right? This map I wanted to put up here because I want you to start to see the great things that Mary and Joseph had to do, the distances they had to travel, and what was going on. So up here in Nazareth, that's where they're getting the visits and the announcements and that, hey, you're pregnant, congratulations, sitting on all the birth notices. And Mary makes this trip down to Bethlehem to see Elizabeth, and then finds out that she's pregnant, and then marches her way back up. Remember, she's got to go around Samaria too, because the Samaritans were no friends of the Jews. So she's making a pretty long journey, right, to go down and see her. This would have been the inn that Jesus would have been born in. When they come back down into Bethlehem for the census, this isn't this nice little stable, with the shelter and the nice cool wood thing to hold the feet. Jesus would have been born in this stone water trough in a cave underneath an inn. Very, very rough. That whole Silent Night song is bumpkiss. This is not a good place to be born, and when you've got an infant mortality rate that's pretty high, that kind of thing doesn't help either, right? So, just a tough entrance into the world. From timing, this is what's going on from from the Matthew account and the Luke account, right? So you get the announcement to Zacharias, who, remember him, he goes mute because he's like, I can't believe this, amazing. Jesus is about 6 months or so after the announcement to Zacharias. And then you get all the way down by about 9-ish BC or AD, Jesus is left behind in Jerusalem. All right. And if you remember last week, I said that the thing about this particular moment in history, this is a tremendous spiritual war. Like the devil's going, wow, if I don't stop it now, then there may not be another good time. So this, no doubt in my mind, that slaughter of innocents is definitely something that the devil had his hand in, and probably started tormenting Herod a lot further along than just that moment. I for sure don't believe that Herod just woke up and went, it's time to kill a bunch of babies. So this is the time frame we're working in. Now, as Jesus grew up, up in the hill country of Nazareth, these are the things that that he would have seen. The Judean hills, the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. You remember the story that the great I am statements of John, that I am the good shepherd, I am the gate. This would have been what I think what Jesus would have been envisioning in the back of his mind, because also every other Israeli or Greek would be walking around, some shepherd sitting by a gate keeping watch over his flock. Right? When Jesus says that I'm the gate, what this guy would do is at night he would lay down in front of that opening, and if anything tried to get in or out of that gate, the shepherd would be woken up, because they'd have to step over him or they'd have to do something, so he can protect them that way. There's just a lot of things here that as Jesus saw and was growing up, all these visions and memories of his childhood would have shaped the very parables and things that he would have said. So if you look up at this picture, one of the things you notice there are all the farmlands, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think of a parable that might have come from him standing up there looking, surveying the ground that he created, maybe just ex nihilo, right out of his breath.
Seed and sower.
Seed and the sower is a really good one. Yep. What about this? That desert Judean hills, just south of Samaria.
The different types of soil in which the gospel was dropped on, some fertile, some dry, some thistles.
Yep. Yep. The Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan, yes.
Can you think of things that as you were growing up, where, I don't know, in the times that God has said, hey, I want you to go witness to that person, where you can say, gosh, there was this time when I was a kid, this thing happened, I can see how God changed my life. There are things that are very, very different about us and Jesus, but I think there's a lot of things where we have just a tremendous amount in common with him.
Go back to that previous slide. So obviously Jesus was not born on 0 BC.
Right. Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, and I know there's some of these, the Julian calendar, whatever, there's a difference for it. But the other beyond the question of how we got to 4 BC is the visit of the Magi. What do you think what prompted them to travel several hundred miles from perhaps Persia to make this stint down there?
That is a really good question, and I have no idea what prompted them to do it. The only thing is, I can think of a few steps, right? Is that the Magi were out there studying the stars anyway. That was what they did. They're wise men, they're learned men. I think they probably noticed what was going on through the prompting of the Spirit. And the only way I can, when we start reading through Luke, And even in John, like Luke says a lot that he was led by the Spirit, or Jesus was led by the Spirit, and it being such a spiritually historic time, monumentous time. Yeah, I see the Spirit moving everywhere to make everything happen. But I don't know what tools he would have said to, hey, take a look up there.
Yeah. The only thing I've heard that's even somewhat plausible is Daniel, who wrote that there will be the cutting of the Messiah, indicating obviously there's a great one coming,
Yep.
and that these people come from Persia, which is where he spent most of his life, when he talks about that there would be the birth of the Messiah,
Yep.
that he would eventually be cut off, that perhaps in their efforts they were looking for something.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Because Daniel even he noticed that 70 years of captivity was almost up, and
Exactly.
started spending a lot of time in prayer, confessing the sins of him and the nation and everything. And then he gets that great vision.
490 years.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Gosh, I didn't mention much about Herod, and I probably should. What do we know about Joseph and Mary as far as this period in their life and their in the announcement, from the announcement to the birth? What do you know, or what have you heard about them? Rich, poor,
Poor,
Poor.
devout, carpenter,
Yep. Okay. Who was the carpenter?
Joseph.
Joseph was the carpenter. Okay. That's an important distinction, because I think I'm going to get to this in just a second, but I am not necessarily certain that Jesus was a carpenter. I think he was probably just a general tradesman, probably a stonemason or something. And I'll argue that in just a minute. How do we know they're poor?
When at the offering of the temple, they gave, I think, some pigeons,
Absolutely.
which is kind of
The low end.
Yes, definitely the low end. So let me go to, let's see, Leviticus chapter 12. If you want to flip there. This is why reading the law is important. And all God's word is inspired and profitable for training, rebuke, and so we shouldn't just jump over it just because it's a little difficult. But let's see, Luke 12, verses 6 through 8. And when the days of her purifying are completed, this would be after childbirth, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb a year old for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Then she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who bears a child, either male or female. And if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering, and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. So if you can't afford the lamb, bring the doves. And you see this story in Luke 2:22-24, right, where she brings the birds to the priest. Now it's important because it gives us a little bit of a date when the Magi show up. Because what do the Magi bring?
gold, myrrh,
Gold,
incense.
frankincense, myrrh, all high dollar gifts. If the Magi would have shown up prior to Jesus being presented to the priest, they would have had to bring a lamb, because they would have instantly been welcomed. Okay, so now the interesting thing is we don't know what Mary and Joseph did with those gifts. I think that's probably inconsequential to the story, but you have to wonder, wow, you hit the lottery on that one. What did you do? How did you live? How did that influence Jesus? I think I have maybe a little answer to it, based on his occupation, what he did for a living. Okay, so so as Jesus is growing up, right, the word for used for carpenter is tekton, and it means one who constructs, builder, woodworker, joiner, craftsman, engraver, artist, and it's very, very general. It means a lot of things. It can mean a lot of things. Like, if he's an artisan, I had in my mind, those guys maybe down by the drag who were art students at UT and just kind of sitting around with these long, kind of hippie hairs and just painting and such. I tend to think more that Jesus was at least knew what Joseph did, probably helped him around the garage or helped him in the shop, building things, because that does, in that world, that would certainly help him walk all over Palestine and carry his cross and take the beating that he did. I mean, you're talking about not a hippie Jesus. We're talking about a man who was probably pretty ripped, right, from all the work that he did and the life that he had to lead. Mark 6:3. So this sort of brings up the question: why does everybody think that Jesus was a carpenter? And in our mind, the guy who frames up a house. Because Mark 6:3 says, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at it. So here, Mark is saying, Mark is quoting these guys saying, "Wow, this Jesus really knows how to preach and teach, but he's a carpenter. He's not educated. He's not supposed to be doing this. He shouldn't be able to do this." And then when you go over to Matthew, you get the other side of the picture, and it says, "Is not this the carpenter's son?" So now here it looks like Jesus is being called a carpenter, but over in Matthew it says, no, he's the son of a carpenter, right? So there's kind of could be one or the other, but both of them are used in tecton. Now, the other place folks kind of dig their heels into, no, he was a carpenter, is through Justin Martyr. And Justin Martyr says that when Jesus came to the Jordan, he was considered to be the son of Joseph the carpenter, and he appeared without comeliness, as the scriptures declared, and he was deemed a carpenter, for he was in the habit of working as a carpenter when among men, making plows and yokes, by which he taught the symbols of righteousness and an active life. And I think a lot of us kind of borrow from this, because how cool is it to say that the very God who spoke the words to create this world and this universe and all the things in it came down and used the very nails, the very wood, the very lumber, the very hammers to learn what it meant to be mankind. Oh, isn't that romantic? Isn't that just, that's great. It preaches well too, right? And I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but I'm thinking we may want to back up and just reevaluate. Because if it's a general term, then you can be doing anything. You can be any craftsman, which is probably a better way to describe it. I think as Jesus is growing in wisdom and stature, I'm thinking he's learning the rule: measure twice, cut once. I'm thinking he's learning that swing a hammer accurately. I think he's learning Bible. I think he's learning a lot of Bible. Anybody remember this TV series back in the 80s? Was it the 80s?
Is that the guy who flew around but
Yes!
hit walls
Yes!
all the time?
This is when I was growing up. This was my favorite. This is like my favorite show. So if you've never seen this movie, these TV shows, it is funny. Right? It was funny then, probably not so much now. So this guy here, he's like a high school teacher, and he's driving home, and this UFO shows up and drops like a suitcase, and it's got this superhero costume on it. And so when he's wearing this thing, he can do all kinds of crazy stuff, like fly and all that stuff. Problem is, he didn't have the owner's manual or something like that. Gets lost, and so he has no idea how to control these superpowers that he gets. Sort of this comedy kind of crime thing. So it's funny. You can look him up on YouTube. There is an extra biblical book called the Gospel of Thomas, or the Infancy of Thomas. And when you read it, it's a lot like this, where as Jesus is growing up, it's like he's God without the owner's manual and has no idea how to control any of the things that he can do. Okay, and so this is actually a quote from one of the. It's from the Gospel of Thomas, who is talking about a great rabbi up in Nazareth, And this rabbi goes to Joseph and he says, hey, you know, this Jesus, boy, he is really, really smart. And I think you need to let him learn numbers and letters and all that kind of thing. And so Jesus is just, yep, right? Just all over him. How can you teach me about the alpha and beta if you don't even know the full extent of the alpha? And so the reaction of this rabbi is, woe is me, wretch that I am confounded. I have brought shame to myself by drawing to me this young child. Take him away, therefore, I beseech thee, my brother Joseph. I cannot endure the severity of his look. And so there's this great pain if you're associated with Jesus. Some of the other stories inside the infancy book is this boy, they're out playing, and the boy is running and he bumps into Jesus, and Jesus looks at him and says, you're not going to finish the race, and the kid dies. Like, boom, done, lays him out. And his parents are unhappy and they go after Joseph, and Joseph is kind of, oh, what do I do with this kid with all these magical powers, and I know he's from God. Joseph has this project, and he's having to cut lumber, and he cuts one side of his lumber too short, and Jesus walks up and he goes, okay, line everything up at the top, and he stretches it out and lines everything up so that everything is just right, and Joseph doesn't lose favor with the contract that he has. It's like comedic genius. And so I would really encourage you, if you were looking for a quick chuckle, it's very easy to read, to see why it isn't included in Scripture, but it also makes you go, man, I can't believe that someone actually took the time to write this. Right?
That raises the question, why do you think someone took the time to write this biography that's spurious in nature?
I think because men are fallen, and because the Bible doesn't talk much about the life of Jesus, everybody wants to know. And so I would imagine that the author of The Infancy of Thomas probably said, well, this is as good as any, because clearly he was divine. I'll keep saying it, but I think the devil had a really good goal to try and shut down this whole virgin birth thing. He was, for lack of a better term, hell-bent on keeping this squished.
I agree. Even when you have the canonization, Council of Nicaea, they try to put together, what are going to be the books of the Bible. There's more than just the Bibles that we know right now. There's other books out there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they went through the process of determining what was legitimate and what was false.
Right.
But again, it goes back to the idea that we have an enemy who's constantly trying to implant, insert, confuse, divert, even something as simple as this, but just to throw them more doubt into it.
Yeah.
So
I will hammer this probably more. I'm not going to say more than I should, but I think it's very, very important to remember that Paul's admonition to us is that we're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting against rulers and principalities of this present age, things that we don't see. We know they are there from the impact that they're having on the human race and the human condition. So I think we need to see this very much as a spiritual fight. Okay. Okay. So this brings up the question again. What would his boyhood have been like? Right, having seen all this stuff and growing up. Let me back up just a moment. No, actually, I'm in a good spot. I asked what his characters were, characteristics, or what he would have been going through as a child, and you brought up he would have been very compassionate and probably very different from the rest of the kids, right? When you were growing up, if you were different from the other kids, what happened to you?
ostracized.
Yeah. Picked on, laughed at, scorned. I never really considered, in all my years of being a believer, that it breaks my heart. It really makes me hurt. Never realized how lonely Jesus must have been growing up. And one of the great things is, for me as a kid, I remember being a pretty lonely kid as well. And knowing that the Creator went through that as well, makes it a lot easier for me to go to him and say, you know, God, I don't know why I went through it, but I know you went through it too. And so now how do I live through that? How do I live through all those experiences and use it for the advancement of the kingdom? And it brings into some clarity these images or these descriptions of who Jesus was. Now these are certainly talking about him in his ministry, because there was a time of acceptance and there was a time of rejection by Israel. But growing up, he must have been an awesome kid. And all those times where, I don't know, his buddies were like, hey, let's go throw those rocks at those Samaritans. They have no idea what's about, let's throw them and we'll run, and we'll do all kinds of mischief that kids typically get into. And Jesus probably went, nah, I'm good.
See, but I don't see that. I don't see him as being a lonely kid. He had a big family, and during that time they were poor. I would imagine that they had to work very hard, and I imagine they had chores. He had brothers, and I know when you have a large family, everybody. I mean, you've got some that are quiet, you've got some that are outgoing, and I mean, I don't know. I don't see that.
So I will give you a reference here. I can't. What's that? I might have written it down. Oh yeah, here you go. I think it's Mark. Hold on. Let's see if this is it.
So you think, even though he was the son of basically a peasant, I mean, I would think that his life would probably be like every other ordinary peasant's son. No high aspirations, no expectation that you're not a royalty. You're a grunt. You're a worker.
Yes.
And I think in many respects, his life would probably mirror that. The question I have is, when, because as a child, we know they don't have a whole lot of self-awareness. At what point in his juncture, was it at his 12 or 13th-year-old birthday, or at what point did he become fully aware of the fact, I am God? I mean,
Yeah.
at some point or another, he did make that connection.
Yep.
But we want to be very careful that we don't somehow take away his humanity. He was an ordinary child who picked his nose, who ate bugs, and
Yep.
pinched girls.
Absolutely.
Yet was without sin.
And without saying. So here's
But then to have the confidence to teach in the temple
Absolutely,
at
yeah.
12 or
So
13?
so the interesting thing here is, I'm not saying he didn't have friends. I'm not saying that there was no joy, and because it's kind of funny too, is that of all the virtues that are talked about Jesus, his humor is never discussed.
Hmm.
And like if you really sit down and it's British humor, right? It's really, really dry, but you do have to notice it. And I'm going to try and pick some of those out and see if we can't expound on it. But yeah, he had a sense of humor. What I'm saying is that I think he knew he was different. And I think there were certain times where his buddies said, "Hey, let's go get into some trouble," and he said, "No, I'm not doing it."
I don't know that it mattered to him that he was different.
I would say it probably did, because if it didn't matter, then how does he know all of our griefs, all of our sorrows? How can he do all those things?
Yeah, I think to John's point, it's very difficult for us, right? Just regular, normal, everyday people, to now think how God would think too.
Mhm.
So it's easy to relate to how we would think.
Sure.
So, but Jesus wasn't just man; he was God and man. So now the paradigm is completely different.
Really
right?
shifts.
So Like if I was Jesus and I was the one who always had to say no to all the things that my friends wanted to do,
Yeah.
like I can completely see where that, would get him. Even to the point of when he's older and he goes to the house and his parents and his brothers are outside, they say, "Hey, come out," and they say, "Man, he's lost his mind." Right, his own family.
That's
is
where I was
saying,
going. Yep.
Like he's lost his mind. He doesn't know what he's doing. So I think it's difficult, but I do think it's helpful. It is to me anyway to recognize that, like out of Hebrews, like there's not a thing that I go through in my life that Jesus can't relate to. Like that's pretty stinking amazing. That, like, anyway,
So
So
this
you're
is
telling
where I
me,
was going to is.
so you're telling me that if Jesus had this chocolate mustache around his face, and Mary asked him, "Did you eat the chocolate cake?" Jesus would have said, "Yep, I did."
Didn't believe he would. So
stole the cookie from the
So Mark 3:20. That's where it started. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that he could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He is out of his mind." If your own family is saying that you're nuts, and they knew him growing up, so I think he, as a man of sorrow, is laughed at and mocked, feels it all.
Well, I tend to agree. I mean, we're called to imitate Christ. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And in the art of neighboring is we need kind of the lampstands in our neighborhoods for trying to bring people together in hopefully a unconditional purpose, just to get to know somebody. A lot of people are going to think we're nuts. Like, what? I don't want you over here. I don't want you talking to me about how I am. I don't want to share that. And so, as Christ was a youth, he was a lampstand. I mean, he was probably different than other kids, and it probably was maybe not for him, but to look at it through my eyes, it could potentially be a challenging existence when you are constantly, his entire life he was going against the grain of man. So I kind of do get the from my perspective anyway, it could be challenging, it could be lonely, but as he comes into who he is, I don't think he would have a problem to say, "Yeah, I stole the cookies out of the cookie jar." I mean, for him, it's who he is. Right? He's not going against anything.
Yeah. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to expand on a little bit, and I kind of jumped over it. I asked about the genealogies and what was going on here. But if you look back at Jesus' genealogy, and this would have been completely known to his contemporaries, but Matthew's line, the women that are mentioned, three of the four are foreigners. Tamar and Rahab are Canaanites. God didn't really care much for the Canaanites when they were going into the Promised Land. Ruth is a Moabite. You know where the Moabites came from?
Esau.
No. From Lot.
Lot, I saw you right.
So Lot, after he's rescued out of Sodom and Gomorrah, they're living in this cave, and he's with his daughters, and his daughters go, there's no man around, and let's get Dad drunk, and let's have sex with him, and maybe we can continue on the line. So Moabites and Ruth come from basically rape, okay, incestuous rape. Let's see here. The small town of Bethlehem, he's born in Bethlehem, small town, grew up in this hick town of Nazareth. John 1:46 is the, who said it, but anything could come out of Nazareth. But there is no expectation of anything very good coming out of there. In the genealogy, Judah, he's in that line. Remember Judah? What happened with him?
Yep. Jacob's blessing.
Judah sleeps with his son's wife while she's described as a temple prostitute. The child produced is Perez in the line of Jesus. David, obviously, the adulterous affair with Bathsheba. That actually had some significant some significant problems as well. One, David, the great king of Israel, murders
You're right.
murders Uriah. A baby dies, and within second generation, Israel is split. So, I mean, that was devastating. Hezekiah is also in that line. Remember Hezekiah, he's supposed to die. God extends his life, and then one of the first things that Hezekiah does is brings this envoy from Babylon and goes, "Hey, take a look. Look at everything." And Isaiah says, he was a fool, just nuts for doing that. Wasn't that long later that the Babylonians come in and just and carry him off into captivity. There's bad things that are happening inside the line of Jesus, which is amazing that someone's family can be so screwed up and still great things happen through the rest of his life. But I do think like I say, I don't necessarily know that he was just moping around all the time like most teens do, but I do think that he knew loneliness. I think he knew there's no way that he can't say loneliness is not good in Genesis, and we continue to feel that stuff, and he doesn't know what it means. I think there's some things there. But again, this is why I asked the question: is it okay to, at least at this time, where we make an exception to the rule, we suspend the rule that says we can't read back into Scripture? I don't know. I think in this case it'd be okay, as long as we're not making taking doctrinal positions on it.